This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Parshas Acharei. The Gemara tells us something very interesting. The Gemara tells us in Masechtas Yuma Lamed Beis, Tanur Abana. The Gemara is commenting on the Pasuk in Parak Tez Zayin, Pasuk Chav Gimel, that you have on your sheets at number 1. The Pasuk says, Uva Aharon El Oyel Moyed. Aaron will come to the Oyel Moyed, Upashadas Bigdei Habad. He will remove his white garments that he donned when he came into the Heichal. He'll leave them there. Now we know that on Yom Kippur there were two types of avodas that Aaron HaKohen did, or the Kohen Gadol did. He did the avodah shebifnim and the avodah shebachutz. When he did the avodah on the inside, he wore the white garments, right? Why? In kategar nasa sanegar, he can't wear the golden garments. Remind Hashem of the chet ha'egal. But when he did the avodah outside, he wore the golden garments, his regular 8 garments. And the Gemara wants to know, this pasuk that says, Uba Aharon el Oyel Moyed, what was he coming to the Oyel Moyed to do at that time? Says the Gemara, Tanur Abana, Uba Aharon el Oyel Moyed, Lama Huba. What did he come for? Einai ba, he only came, Ela lahoitzi es hakaf, to remove the spoon, the es hamachta, and the shovel. He had put the spoon and the shovel with the incense on the inside, and now he's coming to remove them. Says the Gemara, Kol ha-parsha kula nemra ala seder. If you look through Parshas Acharei about the avodah that Aaron HaKohen did, it's all written in order. Everything's in sequence. Everything is in the sequence that he performed the avodah, except for this pasuk of Uva Aharon. Except for this pasuk. Why? How do we know this pasuk is out of order? My taima, Amar Rav Chisda Gemiri, we have the following tradition: Chamesh Tvilais, 5 immersions, the Asar Kiddushin, and 5 sanctifications of the hands and feet. Toivel, what?
10. Sorry, 10.
And 10. Thank you. Toivel Kohen Gadol Umakadesh Barbayon. Okay, so we have a tradition that he immersed 5 times. He washed his hands and feet 10 times. Frak the Gemara, v'i kisidran. If this pasuk is in order, loy mishkachas lehu ela shalosh tfilos v'shisha kiddushin. We only find 3 immersions and 6 washings. In other words, like this. This is the halacha. Every time Aaron HaKohen moved from the inside to the outside, right? For instance, he started on the outside in golden garments. When he would change his garments, he needed to do 2 things: wash his hands and feet before, immerse, and wash his hands and feet after. Every time there was a change of garments, you needed to wash your hands and feet before and after, and immerse in the mikvah. So Aaron HaKohen, he's going from the outside to the inside. That's 1 immersion and 2 washings. From the inside to the outside, again, 1 immersions. From the outside to the inside, 3. From the inside to the outside, and that 5 times. 5 immersions, 10 washings. If this pasuk is written in order, then you only find that he moved back and forth 3 times, which would mean 3 immersions and 6 washings. And since we know there were 5 immersions and 10 washings, this pasuk must be out of order. Okay? Fine. Now, by the way, let's just get a look at number 4. Number 4 gives us a little bit of an understanding of what avodos Aaron HaKohen did on Yom Kippur. Number 1, Zeh Seder Avodas HaKohen Gadol B'Yom Kippur. Aleph was Karban Tamid Shel Shachar V'Chelek MiKarbanos Musaf. He brought the Tamid Shel Shachar. He brought part of the Karbanos Musaf. In what? The Big Day Zahav. Did Aaron immerse yet? No. Did he do Kiddush Yadayim Reglaim? No. Then Beis Avodah HaMiyuchedes Yom HaKippurim. He did the special Avodah of Yom Kippur, which was the par, the Sayer, so Kohen Gadol, the par and Sayer of the Kohen Gadol. In Matan Hadamim, he would put the blood on the Mizbech HaPnimi and on the Paroiches. He would do the Haktaras B'Kodesh HaKadoshim. He would bring the incense in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Shiluach HaSar LaAzazel, and then the Sar LaAzazel in the white garments. Then he would come out and do Gimel, Hakravas Eloi Shel Kohen Gadol. He would bring the ram of the Kohen Gadol, Va'ayol Ha'am, and the ram of the people, Ushar Karbanos Musaf, on the outside. Then he would come back in, Daled. He would remove the spoon and the pan that was on the inside. On the inside. And then he would go back out, right? He brought the tamid of the afternoon, and he brought the incense on the golden mizbeach. Menara.
Are there psukim for all of these? When that number one, I mean, is it a pasuk?
No, they're not psukim for all of these.
How do you know? Because you don't have that.
No, because this is clearly out of order. This has to take place. In other words, what the Gemara is telling us is that if you look at the psukim, take a look in Acharei. If you look at the psukim, here look in Perek Tezayin Pasuk Chav Gimel. What does it say right before Pasuk Chav Gimel? You have in Pasuk Chav Beis, right? We have the whole thing about the Sarla Azazel. Or look before. It says, V'yatzel ha-mizbech shel lefnei Hashem v'chipar alav v'lakach midam ha'par midam v'zazel ha'kares ha-mizbech saviv. And then the Sarla Azazel. If this avoda of Uba Aharon is immediately following the Sarla Azazel, that means Aaron never changed his clothing yet. Aaron is still wearing the white garments that he performed the avodah of the Sarla Azazel. That can't be. Because if that's the case, then you don't find 5 exchanges. So therefore, what do you have to say? You have to say, look at Rashi in number 2, you have to say like this. Look at number 2. Uba Aaron Eloi Amayid. Amar Rabbeinu she'ein zeh mekayim shel mikor zeh. Chazal tell us this is not the place of this pasuk. V'nasnu tam l'devreim b'Maseches Yuma. And the Gemara Masechta Yuma explains, V'amru, and they say, Kol ha-parsha kula nemra ala seder. The entire parsha is set in order. Chutz mi biyazu. Besides this pasuk Uba Aaron. Shehi achar asiyas oilasoi v'oilas ha'am v'haktaras emurei par v'sar shenasa b'chutz v'digdei zav v'toivel u'mekadesh u'poshtan v'loivesh bigdei lavan. In other words, look in Pasuk Chav Daled. V'rachatz b'sar b'mayim b'makam kadosh v'lavashes b'gadav v'yatza v'asas oilasoi v'oilas ha'am. The oilas ha'am and oilasoi is performed before this pasuk of Uba Aharon. This pasuk of Uba Aharon should appear after Pasuk Chav Daled. And in fact, Rashi gives us the order. At the end of Rashi says, the Seder HaMekrais, the order should be like this. The order of the Psukim should be, B'shilach es hasoyer b'midbar, which is Pasuk Chav Beis. Then, Pasuk Chav Daled, V'rachatz es hasoyer b'mayim. Then, the end of Pasuk Chav Daled, V'yatzav asa asay lasay. Then Pasuk Chaf Hey, and then go back to Pasuk Chaf Beis. Then go back to Chaf Beis Uba Aaron. In other words, we need to have some kind of separation between the Sarla Azazel and in other words, if the Sarla Azazel was done in the white garments, if at that moment it's Uba Aaron, then we're losing out on one exchange, and you wouldn't end up with 5 tefillos and 10 kiddushin. You'd only have 3 tefillos and 6 kiddushin. Hence, this pasuk is out of order.
The commentary here says that it's out of order because it describes all of the avodah that involve the white garments together, and then it goes on to describe the avodah with the gold garments. So it's out of sequence in order to...
Because it wants to join it together with the white. But on the other hand, why in the world would the Torah say a pasuk out of order? I mean, if it's trying to give us an idea...
We do that all the time.
No. So there's a rule, Ein Muktam Memuchar B'Torah, when the Torah is saying chronology of stories. But in one inyan where the Torah is telling you about how to do the avodah, why would the Torah specifically write a pasuk out of order? That is the first question raised by none other than the Vilna Gaon. Very interesting. One of the students of the Vilna Gaon was the Chaye Adam, Rabbi Avram Gans. Rabbi Avram Danzig. Rabbi Avram Danzig was the author of the Chaye Adam, and he also wrote the Chachmas Adam on Yeridea, right? Rabbi Avram Danzig. And in the back of the Chachmas Adam, when he writes about Hilchas Avelos, he has a little compendium called Matzeves Moshe, And at the end of this compendium called Matzeves Moshe, he concludes his sefer by writing something he heard from the Vilna Gaon. 6 questions on the beginning of Parshas Acharei. And question number 1 is, why would the Torah write this pasuk out of order? Right? The Gemara in Yuma says the Gemara writes it out of order. The Rashi brings down this pasuk is out of order. Why? What's the reason? Look at number 5. But Parshas Acharei is yesh ladaktek harbe. There are a lot of questions we need to ask. Number 1, Aleph, Dimeshuna I'll tell you outside. The question is like this. By all other karbanos in the Chumash, first the Chumash gives the date, and then the Chumash tells you what to bring. And in Parshas Acharei, you have psukim and psukim and psukim and psukim of karbanos with absolutely no clue of when you're supposed to bring them until you're about to get to Revi, and the Torah says, by the way, you know when you need to do this? On Yom Kippur. On Pasuk Chavtes, page 644, excuse me, you want to tell me when I'm supposed to do it? You know, here I'm getting all excited, I have to bring like 7 different karbanos every day. And then, you burst my bubble at the end of it. By the way, you only do this once a year. I mean, come on, that's not nice. Why would? And this is not the practice of the Torah. The Torah always tells us the date and then the carbon. That's question number 1.
Would it be right for the Torah to tell us the date right after it talks about the Acharei Mos?
What's the problem?
It's not the negative to tell us the date about.
Got to know when to do it.
We do.
Number 2. The Vilna Gaon asked, if you look throughout the parsha, there's one word that keeps on repeating itself. Aharon. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, daber el Aharon. B'zois yavai Aharon. What else? It says, v'hikriv Aharon. V'nosan Aharon. V'hikriv Aharon. V'hikriv Aharon. Right? You get the point, right? Now you'll say, well, maybe only Uba Aharon. Shkoyach. You think I forgot? And you'll say, well, only Aaron could bring it. It's not true. At the end of the parasha it says, any Kohen Gadol could do it. So what do we need to say anything about Aaron? Aaron's not the only one who could do this. Any Kohen Gadol could do this.
Did all the other Kohen Gadolim follow this exact same procedure, or this procedure was...
Yeah, because it says...
and then it was changed later on.
This was the procedure for Yom Kippur?
No, because at the end of the Pasuk it says, at the end of the parasha it says, this is exactly how you do it.
Yeah, but this is the teaching of Aharon, how to perform all of the duties.
If you were writing a composition and you wrote a composition about Mr. Nathan, and you say Mr. Nathan did this, and Mr. Nathan did that, and Mr. Nathan did this, the teacher is going to fail you because he said, I taught you something called a pronoun. Once you say the noun, once you know who we're talking about, you say he. How many times do you have to say Aaron? Enough with the Aaron.
And I had an English composition, you could told just the opposite.
Really?
Don't use that because it's not definitive.
Yeah, but it was the first time.
You use the pronoun, now if you know who you're talking about, if there's any confusion, right? Okay. Another question. Rabbi say, Aharon, right? Remember Aaron? Aaron brings an aisle. Where does it say he has to bring an aisle? It says... So there's a machlokes Tanoim. There's an opinion that this ayol is the ayol that is mentioned among the Musafim that are mentioned in Parshas Pinchas, and there it says on Yom Kippur you have to bring certain Musafim. This ayol that Aaron brings is the ayol of the carbon Musaf that is mentioned in Parshas Pinchas. So the Vilna Gaon asks, 1 second. On many karbanos of Musafim are mentioned in Parshas Pinchas, and Parshas Acharei doesn't talk about any of them, except for this one little aisle. Why are we selecting only this carbon Musaf? Of all the karbanos Musafim that are mentioned in Pinchas, we're only mentioning the carbon aisle. Also, this is a very interesting question, very important question. If you look right before Revi, where the Torah sums up, it says 2 times the exact same thing. In Pasuk Chavtes it says, V'hoisa lachem lechukas oilam. And in Pasuk Lamed Daled it says, V'hoisa zois lachem lechukas oilam. Why does it have to repeat it?
Emphasis.
The The first time the Vilna Gaon asks, it says V'haisa lachem, and the second time it says V'haisa zais lachem. Okay.
Yeah, and also in the first time it talks about Chodesh Hashvi Basar HaChodesh, and in the second time it doesn't say that. It says Achas Bashana, doesn't define the date.
Okay, good. And on that note, it says
more implication that maybe something what Aaron did, that what Aaron did was different than what was going to happen in the future Doros. That's perhaps the implication from the way the wording is.
Also, on the last time it says Achas Bashana, and the first time it doesn't say Achas Bashana. That question is raised by the Meshech Chachma. And therefore we come to something very fascinating, and it's actually an explicit medrash. Although Rashi seems to say that Aaron HaKohen was only allowed to do this avoda once a year, right? Rashi says pretty clearly in the beginning of the parsha, Rashi says, on Bezois Yavai, Aharon and Pasuk Gimel, Rashi says, even with the cloud, v'yavzu loy b'choles, kiyim b'yom HaKippurim, only on Yom Kippur. The Sefarno disagrees with this. And the Sefarno is of the opinion that Aaron HaKohen perhaps could have performed this avoda at any time he liked. And in fact, in Parshas Emar, next week's Parsha, right? Am I off? Maybe I don't have to give it next week on Pata, right? Because we're already talking about Emar. Next week, the Pasuk says that Aaron has to light the Menara. So the Sefarno says, why does Aaron have to light the Menara? The Hadlakas HaMenara is kosher even b'kohen hedyot, even a regular kohen. Says the Sefarno an amazing thing. Look at number 7. Yaroch also Aaron, af al pi shahaisa hadlakas haneros, even though the lighting of the menorah. V'chein ketaras hatamid ksheira b'kohen hedyot l'doiros, k'fi mashkeb l'chazal. Even though we have a tradition that a regular kohen could light the menorah and offer the ketaras. Nevertheless, in Parshas Emor, when it talks about lighting the menorah and when it talks about burning the ketaras, nemar b'shneihem Aaron. Why? Says the Sefarno something incredible. Ki amnam kol yemei hamidbar haya inyan hamishkan b'chal yom ki inyanoi l'doros b'yom HaKippurim. The 40 years in the desert had the status of Yom Kippur in the Beis HaMikdash. Why?
Every day of the 40 years?
Every day. Shenemar. Because what does it say about Yom Kippur? Ki be'anan eira ala kapayras. When you bring your incense, my cloud will come down, and that's when you could do the avodah. What does it say about the midbar? That the anane hakavod were on top of the Mishkan for 40 years. Says the Sefarno, this is not just some kind of symbolic anan. This was a halachic anan. This gives the Mishkan the status of the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur for 40 years. V'zeh ki b'chol yimei hamidbar nemar ki anan Hashem ala Mishkan yoimam v'yesh tia layla boy. Since the Mishkan had the anan for 40 years straight, so it was considered like Yom Kippur for 40 years. And we know on Yom Kippur, Aaron HaKohen is obligated to light the menorah and bring the ketaras. Even though a kohen hedyot is allowed to light the menorah and bring the ketaras normally, right? Even though a kohen hedyot, on any day of the year, he could light the menorah, he could bring the ketaras. But on Yom Kippur, the kohen gadol is obligated to light the menorah and bring the ketaras. So too, says the Sefarno, you know why the Torah says Aaron has to light the menorah and bring the ketaras? Because for the 40 years in the desert, it was like a straight Yom Kippur for 40 years, and therefore Aaron had to be the one to light the menorah and bring the ketaras. V'lochein hayamin aroi, sheyia maseh ha-ketaras v'adlakas haneres bo, hanasim b'fnim, nasim ha'idei kohen gadol, k'marsha nasim l'doros b'yom HaKippurim. So the Sefarno tells us a awesome chiddush.
So it says the Torah is not any day.
No, what he's doing every day is
what Aaron HaKohen does every day is like Yom Kippur the rest of the year. In other words, what the Sefarno is telling us, that the same way Aaron HaKohen or the Kohen Gadol, although the Kohen Gadol was not required to light the menorah and bring the ketaras during the course of the year, on Yom Kippur he was. That is why Aaron HaKohen in the Midbar had to light the menorah and bring the ketaras every single day. That is the opinion of the Sefarno. Now why? So the Sforno says the logic is very simple. Just like on Yom Kippur we did the avoda because the ki be'anan eira ala kaparas, the cloud was there. In the Midbar the cloud was there for 40 years straight.
In Shiva Yemei Milum, when they were training Aaron Nadav and Avihu didn't like the menorah or do the Torah?
Good question. And if you have some leisure time, you could look at number 10, where a gifter seems to ask that question. We're not going to get to that. Okay? But that is a principle set forth by the Sefarno. The Sefarno sets forth the principle that the status of the Anan on top of the Mishkan gave it the halachic status of Yom Kippur. So maybe we could make the case then that if every day was considered Yom Kippur, Aaron HaKohen could do the avoda of Yom Kippur every single day. And in fact, the Medrash says this explicitly, that Aaron HaKohen could do the avoda of Yom Kippur every single day. Look at number 6. Right? Hashem says...
I mean, he could choose the day.
He could choose it at any
He
time.
only do it once a year.
No.
He would do it every day.
He could. In fact, Rav Gifter asked, does that mean every time Aaron came into the Beis HaMikdash, he had to do the avoda of Yom Kippur?
Wait a minute, where are we? Well, we also know that they separated them out for 7 days, right? I mean, there had to be a preparation. How could you do it every day?
Why not?
It would be tamei. I mean, it was never tamei. There were all kinds of preparatory issues that were involved.
Maybe that's only for Yom Kippur. But to do the avoda on the inside,
The avoda of Yom Kippur or the stam avoda?
the avoda of Yom Kippur. Now, basically, Rabbi said what we're saying is now...
You had to be married. What happens if she died?
And it's had something to wife.
You didn't have
Okay, Rabbi said...
I'm sorry.
What happened?
Rabbi said we're getting off track. But we haven't yet made the case. All we've stated so far from the Sforno is that because of the presence of the Anani HaKavod, the entire Mishkan was enveloped with the Kedusha that the Mishkan had on Yom Kippur. That still doesn't mean that Aaron HaKohen was allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim every single day. Because at the beginning of the Parsha, Hashem said, V'al yavai b'choleis el HaKodesh mi beis ha'paroiches.
How do you answer the stira?
No, what's the stira?
One time you say every day, one
No.
time you say neither every day.
So far what we've seen is Aaron HaKohen had to light the Menara and bring the Ketores every day because it had the Kedusha of Yom Kippur. But that still doesn't mean he's allowed to go into the Kodesh
What
HaKadoshim.
about the avodah
But
of Yom Kippur? You said that he could do it every day.
I said we could make the case that he could do it every day, although we don't have necessarily a proof yet that he can. Okay? Now what we're going to look at in number 6 is the Medrash says like this. On the words, V'al yavai b'chol eis el HaKodesh, God said you can't come at all times. What does that mean? You can't come. Does that mean once every 100 years you can't come? Does that mean once every 10 years you can't come? Does it mean once you can't come ever? So the Medrash says, b'chol eis, yesh eis l'shah. Sometimes an ace can mean an hour, sometimes it can mean a day, sometimes it can mean a year, sometimes it means 12 years, sometimes it can mean 70 years, sometimes it can mean forever. So what does it mean over here? Says the Medrash at the end, V'le'es l'shav, v'le'es l'yayim, v'le'es l'shana, v'le'es l'shteim l'shana, v'le'es l'shivim shana, v'le'es l'olam. Ela what? B'chol shah shehu rotza likanes yikanes. Whenever you want Aaron to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, gesund heit. You hear this? As long as you bring these karbanos. So the Mishnah says explicitly that while a Kohen Gadol in the times of the Beis HaMikdash was only allowed to go in on Yom Kippur, Aaron could go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on any day, provided he brings the karbanos. So you'll ask, what do you mean? Doesn't the Torah say, Ki be'anan eira ala kapayres? You need the anan? The answer is like the Svarno said. You have the anan. The anan is always there. But Hashem said, B'chol eis, you can't go in? No, Hashem's saying, as long as you do this procedure, you could go in at any time.
He doesn't do the Ketores procedure in the film?
No.
He doesn't do
When the Sfarno said he did the Ketores, it means the Haktaras on the Mizbeach
He
Haktaras.
doesn't need to do it because the Anan is there, so he doesn't have to do the Anan Ketores piece.
No, he would. If he would want to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he would have to do the whole Avodah Yom Kippur.
Because there's a piece that he brings in the Ketores.
Yeah, no. If he wants to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he has to do whatever is mentioned in this week's Parsha.
You're not saying that he did it. You're saying if he wanted.
If he wanted to do it. In other words, we're learning two major chidushim. Number one, the chidush was that for the 40 years in the Midbar, according to the Sfarno, although technically a regular kohen could do the Menara and the Ketores, Aaron did it. Why? Because the Anan was present. And number two, what the Medrash seems to say is Aaron had the ability to do the avoda of Yom Kippur and go into the Kodesh HaKodashim whenever he wanted.
Including the Sorry Lazazah?
Whenever he wanted. Yeah, if he would want to go in, he would have to do Sar Lazazah.
How about eating? It doesn't mean you can't eat on Yom Kippur. I mean,
Who said? No, it doesn't mean he can't eat. Doesn't mean he
no,
can't eat.
because you do about Yom Kippur, you're supposed to be fasting on Yom Kippur.
The avoda of
You go in there and eating.
the procedure. The procedure.
He can do that.
Says the Meshech Chachma, citing this medrash, skip about 6 lines. Hine b'sefer Gevia HaKesef, in a different sefer called Gevia HaKesef Huva b'Shem Hagra, the Gra explains, the Perushe Pasha, the explanation of this medrash that Aaron could do the avodah at any time is very simple. The Aaron Hayo Yachal Ikanes Tamid B'Seder Hazeh. Aaron could always go into the Kodesh HaKodashim. Rak Shabanav Lo Hayo Hashem Rak B'Yom HaKippurim. Just his children could only go in on Yom Kippur.
So this is like a Horasha.
What is the explanation of that? Says the Meshech Chachma, like the Sfarno tells us. B'nizgala lanu taimo, we could understand the reason al pi masha kasav Sfarno b'sof Emar, based on what the Sfarno teaches us at the end of Emar. Hasha kasav b'ktoras uvahatava Aaron. The reason why when it talks about bringing the ktoras and lighting the menorah mentions Aaron, mishum sheba osan arbaim shana haya ha'anan shayra ala mishkan yomam v'layla. Because for 40 years the Anan was on the Mishkan, kasav ki Anan haya ala Mishkan yomam. Says the Meshech Chachma, v'chein ba'avoda shebeheichal. Therefore, these services that were performed in the Heichal, shesham haya Anan Hashem, haya dinai oisan arbaim shana k'may b'yom HaKippurim. It had the status of Yom Kippur, shekasav by ki be'anan eira ala kaparas. Says the Meshech Chachma, give the man a kiss. V'divrei pi chacham chen, these are beautiful words. However, adds the Meshech Chachma, v'lachein kol oisan arbaim shana hayulay reshus lihikanais b'seder hazeh k'may kain gada b'yom HaKippurim. Okay, that's the principle we're setting forth. Says the Meshech Chachma, that's why at the end of the parsha it says v'lachein kasav b'soif ha-parsha v'hoisa zois lachem l'chukas olam achas b'shana. L'chukas olam, for all eternity, it's only once a year. Sheladayres hurak b'yom HaKippurim. Sha'az Yisrael kamalach eshes rim l'chapar zo l'shchinas kaved ala kavaz anan. And that's why for Elazar and for all future kohanim gedolim, the parsha ends achas v'shana. But the first time when it says v'haisa lachem l'chukas olam, it doesn't say achas v'shana. It says you have to do it on the Chodesh Hashvi, Be'asar LaChodesh, but it doesn't say Achas B'Shana. Okay.
What is the Achas B'Shana emphasize?
It's only once a year. In other words,
no. So that's what it says. Achas B'Shana.
Only Aaron.
Aaron could do it all the time.
No, only once a year. It says.
In other words, the Pasuk says, look carefully. The Pasuk says, Achas B'Shana, right? It says Achas B'Shana, only once a year.
Only once a year for Aaron.
That's for the whole generation. That's for the later generations.
That's for all later generations, yeah. So says the Vilna Gaon.
For the next priest, not...
One moment. Says the Vilna Gaon.
Somebody else.
Then now we understand the answer to all 6 questions. Now that we've established that Aaron had the ability to perform the Avodah B'chol Eish Yirtzeh whenever he wanted, I understand why the Torah keeps on mentioning Aaron. Because this whole beginning of Parshas Acharei is not saying the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Nothing to do with Yom Kippur. It's saying when Aaron is allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKodashim. When he does this procedure. It has nothing to do with Yom Kippur. But it's only Aaron, and that's why the Torah reiterates again, Aaron. The Vilna Gaon asks, why does the Gemara in Yuma say this Pasuk is out of order? It's not out of order. This that we have a tradition, that it has to be specifically in this order, and in this Seder, that's only on Yom Kippur. That's only when the Kohen Gadol is going in on Yom Kippur. You need to have 5 immersions and 10 washing of the hands. And that's why, regarding all future generations, the Pasuk Uba Aaron is out of order. But for Aaron himself, it doesn't have to be in that order. For Aaron himself, he just has to make sure he does everything that it says here, and it's not important what the order is. And therefore the Torah is not out of order at all. The Torah specifically wrote it this way to teach that Aaron HaKohen is permitted to perform it in whatever order he wants.
And therefore he cannot.
What?
Why was Aaron Zophar to do it?
I'm not going to answer that question. And therefore it says the Vilna Gaon.
He can do only 6.
Yeah, therefore all year round, there's only a requirement of 3 immersions and 6 washings. When we say, Rabbi said, when we say the Pasuk Uba Aaron is out of order, it's only for Yom Kippur, it's out of order. Says the Vilna Gaon, why is it, Rabbi say, that of all the karbanos musafim that are mentioned in Parshas Pinchas, only the ayah is mentioned here? Because on the rest of the year, right, look what he says. If you look at number 9, let's see how he answers these questions. He says, Ulefizem maturatz kushas aleph beis. Based on this medrash, we've answered the first and second questions. You know why the Torah starts with the karbanos and only then mentions the date? D'lachem lo hischa b'chodesh hashvi sharei parshazu nemra la'aron v'hu mutar likanes b'chol shah. The reason the Torah doesn't give us the date is because we're talking to Aaron. And to Aaron, he's not limited to a specific date. He could do it at any time he wants. That's why the Torah doesn't begin with the date. And that's why the Torah keeps on mentioning Aaron's name. Regarding the third and fourth question, says the Vilna Gaon. Right, look what he says. V'gam kusha gimel delakach kasav kan ha'ayam misham Aaron b'shayim hashana da'az ein makriv musafin ela dafka b'yom kippur mikol makom tzarich lahakriv ha'ayal. The answer is, of all the karbanos musafim, you're only required to bring a karban musaf on Yom Kippur. What about if Aaron wants to do the procedure not on Yom Kippur? He doesn't have to bring any of the karbanos musafim except for that ayah. That ayah is the only karban that is ma'akev. What about the fourth and fifth questions? Why it has to repeat v'haisa zois lachem l'chukas olam v'haisa lachem l'chukas olam? The answer is v'gam kushas dal v'hei d'lachein le'nichtav v'haya zois lachem. The first time it doesn't say v'haisa zois lachem. The mashma the kai lamala. That would imply it's going above. Uve emes mikan maschil parsha acheres. We are starting a new parsha. Take a look in Pasuk Chavtes and in Pasuk Lamed Dalet. Pasuk Chavtes, it doesn't say v'haisa zois lachem. It says v'haisa lachem. You know why it omits the word zois? Because we're starting a new topic now. The new topic is, until now we're talking about how Aaron could go in on any day, and now we're talking about a new thing. Not Zeus, after Aaron. We're talking about what has to be done on Yom Kippur. So we don't say the word Zeus, we say V'hayis alachem l'chukas olam d'lchem l'nichta v'hayis Zeus alachem d'mashet koy l'mal v'emes v'kan maschel parsha acheres dad kan hoy medar v'Aaron b'chol yom v'kan maschel inyan acher d'b'chodesh hazeh ta'anu. You know what the new inyan is? During the rest of the year, like you asked, Aaron doesn't have to fast if he wants to go in. He could eat. Right? He could eat whatever he likes. He could do the avodah and go into the Kodesh HaKadosh. Now we're starting a new topic. And the new topic is, what has to be done on Yom Kippur? V'hayis alachem v'chukas olam v'inisem es nafshay sechem v'az v'chipar ha'kohen v'yachar kach siyem. And therefore we end v'hayis azois lachem ritzon aloymer kol seder avodah hanemer l'mal l'chukas olam. Okay? That is the opinion of the Vilna Gaon, and this is what the Chachmas Adam says he heard from the Vilna Gaon. I just want to point out two more things. If you look at number 11, the Sefarno tells us something awesome. The Sefarno says, Uvehalos he'anan. The end of Sefer Shemos ends off by talking about the fact that the Anani HaKavod was always stationed on top of the Mishkan. If you turn to the end of Sefer Shemais, the Torah tells us, it says, Ki anan Hashem ala Mishkan yoimam V'yesh tia laila boy le'enei kobos Yisrael b'chol ma'aseim. Says the Sfarno. Uvehalo sa'anan. Why is the Torah telling me that the Anan was always on top of the Mishkan? B'chol kach hoisa shrias hashchina keva b'Mishkan. This is teaching me that the Shechina was so stationed on the Mishkan, shalo haya mistale klau misham. It never departed ad shahayu Yisrael tzrichim l'saya until the Jews needed to travel. V'zelo haya b'Shilo. This kind of Anan was not present in Mishkan Shiloh. V'lo b'bayis Rishon, it was not present in the first Beis Hamikdash. V'lo b'bayis Sheni, it was not present in the second Beis Hamikdash. So it comes out, says the Sfarno, that's why the Sfarno said earlier, that although in the times of Shiloh, and the first Beis Hamikdash, and the second Beis Hamikdash, any Kohen could light the Menara and do the Ketores, not in the Mishkan. In the times of the Mishkan, we had concentrated Shechina like on Yom Kippur, only Aaron. But says the Sfarno, Aval Yoser Mizeh Yiyeh Bebayis Shvini Shlishi Yibana V'Zikaron Meher V'Yameinu. It should be built in our times. There will be more Shechina in the times of the third Beis Hamikdash than even in the times of the Mishkan. How do I know? Ka'amrei, like the Pasuk says in Zechariah, Va'ani eyeh la no'am Hashem choymas eish saviv v'lechavod eyeh v'soicha. So it comes out, points out, the Sefer Ananei HaKavod, that when the third Beis Hamikdash will be built, the Kohen Gadol will be allowed to go in to the Kodesh HaKadoshim at all times. And a regular Kohen will not be allowed to light the Menara and do the Ketores. We'll just end off with another Sfarno. The Sfarno just told us that in the times of the third Beis Hamikdash there'll be greater Shechina even than what? Even than the Mishkan. Says the Sfarno. What does that mean? Sfarno writes in Parshas Shmini that before the Ched HaEgal there would have been no command to eat not to eat tray food. That wasn't going to be part of the plan. But after we sinned with the Egal and we lost the spiritual nature of our bodies, we needed to purify ourselves. And now we were no longer worthy of God resting in our bodies without a Mishkan. And therefore we needed a Mishkan. But la'asad lavai will be on the Madrega where we won't even need a Mishkan for Hashem Shechina.
He will dwell
in us ourselves. On us ourselves. So this is the higher level of Hashras Hashchina that the Sfarno is talking about. That the Sfarno says in the Bayis Shlishi will have a higher level of Hashras Hashchina, even greater than the Mishkan. So maybe it would come out differently than the Sefer Ananei HaKavod. Ananei HaKavod says, what? In the times of the third Beis Hamikdash, you'll need the Kohen Gadol to light the Menara. It could be the Hashras Hashchina will be so great where every individual will have the Hashras Hashchina. Maybe even anybody will be able to do this Avodah. Have a good Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.